Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our cybersecurity webinar today. I know you all are super busy and want to respect your time, so we'll keep it short and to the point. I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. My name is Joe Dunn, founder of Stradiant, an Austin-based technology services company. We provide long-term technology solutions for our clients. We partner with our clients as an extension of their business to enable them to focus on running their businesses in the most efficient way. We've got Bart Barsiewicz, our security expert. He is a cutting-edge provider preventing cybercrime, simplifying business continuity management, and finding and closing security gaps. And finally, we have Sean Hale. He is a finance and operations advisor focused on working with nonprofits to ensure a strong back office to achieve their missions. He's served in the nonprofit sector for over 2 decades and understands how to nurture structure in a way that drives teams to excellence. And how you guys doing today?
Happy to be here. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Always excited to spread the word and talk a little bit more about cybersecurity.
There you go. It's a never-ending thing. All right. Well, that's great. Let's go ahead and get started. Bart?
All right. Thanks, Joe. Hello, everyone. As Joe already introduced me, I'm Bart Barsiewicz. I've been in the security field for quite a while now, probably a little bit over a decade, I would say. And I probably have seen it all, and you see it all the time on TV, on the TV news, internet, that there's something always happening. If it's not a LinkedIn breach or not a credit bureau breach or things like that, there's always something going on. So what I always like to start with is, how do you actually see security? How does everyone see security, and how it's built, and what are the main 3 pillars or principles, you may want to say, of security? So as you can see on the screen right now, I always start out with like the physical security works and go over the 3 main pillars. So I always like to compare it and explain it to a home. So in a home, you have the 3 main principles of security as well. So you'll have protect, detect, and respond. So those are the 3 things that we can easily relate to our daily lives. So you'll have the doors, windows, locks, a fence around your house. Inside, you may have an alarm, some motion detection, crime watch, monitoring for that. And then for the response phase, you may have a dog or a gun, or you can call the police, or you have insurance. And so how do all those 3 really work together, and can they work separately? That's always the golden question. So when we do that a lot, and we actually ask questions of our attendees, or if we do those presentations in person, the main thing, so what we always ask is, what's the most important thing in that equation? So I will tell you that if it's cybersecurity for a business, or if it's security for a home, or if it's any other type of security, the answer that we get 80% of the time from, or I would say from 80% of attendees, is always protect. So as protect is very important, because that is the first layer of defense. That's the first layer of security. In the end, what it really comes down to is that detect pillar is the most important, because if someone breaks your protection and you can't detect it, in the end, you can't respond. So that's why that's always really important. Put a lot of thought and a lot of design around any kind of security to that the detection pillar of the whole equation. The one thing that I'll always say is, all 3 of them are very important, because you cannot have either security or cybersecurity without all 3 of them, because you always have to have 3. You always have to have the first layer of protection, you have to have the layer of detection, so you can, in the end, respond. And if we were to put it together, put it towards cybersecurity, or cybersecurity inside of your business, the breakdown will be very similar, because under protect, you may have an antivirus, you may have policies and procedures, you may have door locks, you may have a key fob, but then the detection phase is someone has to be watching. Someone has to see if there's a virus in your computer, and that antivirus doesn't necessarily stop it. You always have to have that phase as well to be able to respond in the end and get past it. So with that, we're actually going to jump over to how has that evolved the cybercrime. So when we looked at cybercrime in the past 10, 20 years ago, it always started out with the organization that was centralized. Hackers had to build all their stuff from scratch. They couldn't just call up Rackspace or another cloud service provider and spin up some new servers. They had to do it all themselves. They had to identify the different vulnerabilities that they could exploit and write their own software for the attack. The entire process in the old days for the cyber criminals was very expensive. And because of that cost back then, what they really did is they really focused on those golden nuggets. They focused on the large organizations where they could in the end get the most money if they were able to breach them. Sorry, that was not supposed to happen. Today, it is very different. So there's a new ecosystem that is very different and it's much more distributed. They can buy the different components to launch their attack. They can specialize in certain areas of attacks. It is much cheaper and it is much more opportunistic to cyber criminals, and they can target much smaller and in the end much more vulnerable organizations. That's why they really have been going more and more after the SMBs, the small and medium businesses that may not have a budget for cybersecurity or may not have a proper risk assessment done to actually see where most of their gaps are and what they really need to protect. So as we can see here, around 50% of small businesses have experienced that attack. More than 70% of attacks nowadays target small and medium businesses. So it's really concerning here that we have to start protecting those SMBs. And if it's a nonprofit or if it's especially with nonprofits, a lot of times the conversation of cybersecurity doesn't always get to the board meetings, and it is really important having someone that can bring that up in a board meeting. It is important, and talk about the statistics, talk about the different things and the different threats that they might be facing. So what would the biggest threats to a nonprofit be from that standpoint? Number one always is a data breach. So if it's a nonprofit in healthcare, nonprofit in any kind of fund distribution or things like that, having a data breach and having data stolen could lead to regulatory issues, could lead to fines, could lead to compliance problems. One of the biggest ones, and that's basically affects every single organization, is ransomware. So ransomware itself have really evolved over the years. And in the old days, as we all remember, there was a ransomware. Someone had all their data encrypted and all their data locked. And then what happened? The attackers, the cyber criminals, just wanted to get paid. So they'll take the money. Some people will pay them. Some people will start from backup. They'll just go move on to the next target. Nowadays, they unfortunately have gotten smarter. So besides just encrypting all your files or making them unusable or taking your systems down, they also steal them at the same time. And they actually have this one more carrot to dangle above you, that if you don't pay them, they will release that data. So that's why it's becoming more and more important, because ransomware now, where before it was considered just an attack and you could pay or you could restart from backup, now it becomes more of a data breach, because more and more what happens is they actually release the data when the ransom is not paid. There's phishing attacks. And with phishing attacks, what really comes down to here is really comes down to training your employees, training the staff, making sure the staff understands how to see a phishing attack, how to see what emails are good, what emails are bad, and what the repercussions are of clicking a link or putting in your credentials where they're not supposed to go, and things of that nature. The one thing that I always say is over 90% of cybersecurity breaches or attacks or ransomware start with a human. So that's why phishing attacks are so crucial as well to protect against, because as humans, we always want to be trusting. We always want to, um, I wouldn't say trust people, but we want to believe that not everyone is out there to get us. But the reality is there's many people out there trying to get us in the wrong way. Uh, then we'll move on to, especially now with COVID and the pandemic that we're going through, is the adoption of bringing your own device to work. More and more people are going home, working from home. They don't always get a device to bring home from work, like a desktop or a laptop. So it's really important to make sure that in your organization, you're able to control and secure those devices in the right way so they do not lead to a catastrophe from here. Um, Another thing that we also see is a lot of times in the small and medium businesses, kind of what I already talked about, is having that risk analysis. So having a plan and reviewing what gaps are there, what risks are in your business, and how in the end you can actually protect against those risks. So as we move forward, especially when it comes to phishing attacks, the emails now are a lot more finely tuned to small and medium businesses. As you can see on the screen, there are a couple of example emails. One is from FedEx, and one is from AT&T. Those emails look very legitimate. A lot of people use those services. Um, so in here, if we pay a little bit closer attention to the FedEx one, on the top of the email, you can see where it's an email address. It says FeedEx. So it's details at feedex.com. So that could be one of the things that you can train your staff on, or even remember for yourself that always check and see where's the email coming from, where's the link going to take you. Is that an email that you're actually expecting to get? Does the email look different from the last time that you received it, and things of that nature. So really, what you want to do is know what the new threats are that are coming out. As I will say it over and over again, train your staff, train your staff, train your staff. There's always something new coming out, and it's very critical that your staff is aware of what's going on in the world and what the new scams are. So also, this phishing attacks could lead to things like spyware. So let's say someone clicked on a link in the previous FedEx email to print a shipping label, and in the background, without anyone noticing or any kind of intervention there, it installed a little spyware program. As you can see on the screen here, they can grab all kinds of information. And honestly, that's a service that a hacker could buy. The service can just go out on the dark web, which, as the name states, you can get pretty much anything and everything that's illegal without nobody knowing who you are. So in that link, once that installs, then they're getting all that information. Then that information gets transferred into a dashboard where they can see all of it, and they're able to steal credit cards. They're able to log into bank accounts. They're able to steal any kind of settings from your computer. They can see what data you have on your computer, and do they actually that also gives them a way to have a foothold inside your computer to also look at other attacks and deploying other attacks. The other one that we already talked about a couple of times is ransomware. So there are all kinds of different types of ransomware. It could be a fake antivirus. Sometimes what happens is users browse on sites that maybe they should not be on, or they're trying to do some research and they go to some questionable sites, and a pop-up comes up saying that it's the FBI and you have to pay something to because you went to a site that is not legal, you shouldn't be there. So then you have to pay a ransom. So it could be FBI ransomware, it could be all kinds of different things. You can see on the screen the little window that we have there is CryptoLocker. So that's how it really looked in the previous days, or in an older days. Right now, there's a lot of other ones that they don't just say, "I pay me money and I'll give you your files back." At this point, it will say send certain amount of Bitcoin, because that's what cyber criminals normally use. They'll use cryptocurrency because it is untraceable. And if you don't pay, then they might want to release your information instead of just deleting it and making it unusable. They'll actually find different ways to make people pay. Another thing that could result from a phishing email or phishing attack is your digital credentials. So your usernames and passwords might also be stolen. As we can see here, 39% of adults in the US use either the same or very similar password for all the sites that they have. And this one, actually, I'll share my own personal story because I've done it once that I'm aware of, at least. Back when, some of you might remember, when LinkedIn breach happened, it was around 2014 or something like that. I had the same password, I think, for LinkedIn and Twitter. So didn't think anything of it, because by that point I was actually in a place where I changed all my passwords because I knew that the breach happened, but I hardly ever used Twitter at that point of my life. So one day I just see a bunch of emails start coming in from Twitter. There's one after another, one after another. I'm like, oh, it's just like some ads. So I didn't think anything of it because I never really used Twitter. And then one day I looked at it, and it was showing what it was actually doing. It was showing the different logins. So there will be a login from Ukraine. There will be a login to my Twitter account from China. There will be a login to my Twitter account from Korea, North Korea, South Korea. And what happened there is those credentials that were stolen from LinkedIn were released to the dark web. They were just sitting out there on forums for anyone to grab. So anyone that would scan, that would take the combinations that were released, so it would be a username and a password. They took that, they logged into my Twitter, they started posting a lot of explicit content, try to connect with people. I was able to catch that, probably a little late, but I'm going to say again, I never used Twitter at that point, so I didn't even think anybody was following me at that time. So what I did, I just went ahead and deleted the account. But just think about what else could happen. They actually just released that during the election season. There was a researcher, I do believe it was from Sweden. So it was a security researcher and what they do is they try to find, security researchers are ethical hackers. So they're the good hackers. They're the hackers that will go out and find vulnerabilities or find risks that they see out there, and then they'll alert the proper authorities to make sure that those risks cannot be exploited. And according to the articles that we've seen online, they were able to hack into Donald Trump's Twitter account. Of course, the password was changed right after. They notified the NSA, they notified the White House to make sure, before the story even went public, everyone was notified to make sure that the password was changed. But those are different things. If you're using passwords that are easy to guess, if you have kind of a celebrity status, maybe you went on TV or you wrote some kind of article, someone will be out there trying to get you. And some people do it for practice and fun. Some people do it to get ransom. Some people will actually send you emails and try to demand that you pay them a ransom so they don't destroy your account or they don't destroy your reputation by doing that. So as we went through here, so we already talked about that your credentials could be compromised through phishing. They could also be compromised through malvertising. So those will be fake ads that you can see. So let's say you go to, actually, let's take a step back on that one. So how do fake ads come up? So as we already saw before, there was some spyware that could steal credit cards, right? So with those credit cards that attackers steal, they can then go out and they can put up a fake advertisement either on the Wall Street Journal. They'll actually put them up on very reputable sites. It could be an advertisement to sign up for a great deal that looks too good to be true, or things of that nature. So they will use that, but then they will ask you to create a username and password to log into their system to actually get the deal. And they're coming back to the same mentality that people will use either the same or very similar password and email combination for other applications. Think about if that was your bank account and someone got into your bank account, you log in the morning and there's no money in it. That could be really bad. Then we have watering holes, which are just targeting. They target a popular site and they can inject some kind of malware in it and grab all kinds of different things from it. And then there'll be other different web attacks. So those things always happen. And just going back to one more story on the phishing. There was a client that I worked with a couple years now ago, and they were targeted by a phishing campaign. So the emails were sent to high executives in the company. And at that point, they were not doing any kind of user security training. Their employees were not trained, and those were also executives. There was about 30 of them that were targeted. 10 of them were breached. So what does that mean? Out of those 10 that were breached, they used the same. And how were they breached? Actually, let's take a step back. They were the way that they were breached is they received an email with a notification that they have a new file that they have to review. So they click on it. I mean, for anyone that uses either Dropbox or SharePoint or Office 365 or any kind of cloud-based file solutions, you know that when someone shares a file with you, you receive an email and you have to log in to see that file. So they clicked on the link, they went to log in to see that file, put in their credentials, hit login, page timed out. They figured, okay, maybe there's something wrong with it. They'll resend it. They moved on with their day. They didn't think anything of it actually in that situation. They didn't find out that something was wrong until about a week and a half later when it was payday. So what happened there was the attackers took a different form of attack. They tried to guess what kind of payroll service they were using, and they were using ADP. They used the same email and password combination to log in to the payroll service. Then they went back to their mailbox because there was also the same password that they used for their email. For their email, they set up rules inside of their mailboxes that so the user would not see any emails that will come back from ADP, and they changed their routing and bank account information, and in the end, their paychecks were sent somewhere else. So it was about a week and a half until they were able to figure it out. But you can see that those people are getting smarter and smarter. Those attackers are they're always figuring out new ways of how to steal more money easier, or how to target different individuals to get there. And really what that teaches us is we have to be one step ahead. So that's why it is important, and we'll go through it a little bit later. What are the really important things and what do you really have to pay attention to? But just going back to the dark web stuff, and when your credentials are compromised, there's a couple of things that we can talk about here. So password security, using complex passwords. So using 16, 20 character passwords on all your logins, and always using a different password. Regularly changing your passwords if there is no multi-factor authentication associated with it, and not reusing your passwords. So just those three things can get quite overwhelming for people. So what we always recommend here is use a password manager. There's many password managers out there. You can get a password manager. As a business, you should really think of a way how you manage your passwords. How you're managing your passwords now. Most of the businesses, when we get started with them, when we start working with them, and they have not been exposed to proper cybersecurity hygiene, or maybe a step up security hygiene from what they had before, what we'll see is they will manage a bunch of passwords in an Excel spreadsheet that sits on a network that people that might not need to have access to it sometimes have access to it. We've seen that happen, or we've seen passwords stolen that way as well. So investing in a password manager for your business is basically a no-brainer here, because one, it really protects the passwords of your company, because you can have a bank account login that maybe multiple users have access to or need to log into. You may have other credentials and other logins throughout the organization that need to be shared. So it just creates a very easy way for you to keep it secure and share it. Then we can move on to the multi-factor authentication. And that's really one of the biggest things now is almost any password can be compromised with time. Sometimes it could be a very, very long time to compromise a password, but most passwords that get compromised, they're very easy. There could be a dictionary word, which those could be cracked very, very quickly. So adding the multi-factor authentication to all services that allow it. And I always tell everyone to start with probably the two most important ones when they go to add multi-factor authentication if they don't have it: your bank account and then your email. Because one is you don't want anybody getting in your bank but you. And then if someone can get into your email, they most likely can reset a lot of your passwords for other things as well. So those are the two really important things for you to have secured with this multi-factor authentication. And for anyone that does not know how that works, it works in a variety of different ways. So let's take a banking website for example. So Bank of America, it's actually one of the banks that I use. Every time I go to log into my bank, I also receive a text message, so I have to put in the code. There are some other ones if you're using a VPN for your business. Anytime your employee goes to connect to the VPN, they'll open up the little application, they'll hit connect, they'll type in their username and password, and then they get a pop-up on their phone that is telling them you're trying to log in or this application is requesting authorization, and they can hit approve. So there's all kinds of different ways that could come in. Could be a text message, could be an email, could be an app on your phone, could be Google Authenticator. That's what a lot of people are used to. If you're using Gmail for your personal email accounts, you'll have an app that will pop up and say, give me the fact, click number 16 on your app on your phone to log into the browser on your computer. And then another one is monitoring the dark web. So as a business, that's actually pretty important. There's a client that I have been working with personally, and it was probably about a week and a half ago, we received a call that one of their users just sent out 2,000 emails, and they were all fraudulent. They all had PDF attachments with malicious code, and they were doing all kinds of crazy things, to be honest with you. And what happened? What happened was I was trying to help them out, but they didn't want, they weren't willing to actually go into the more advanced and the more mature cybersecurity plan or cybersecurity hygiene, and they weren't doing that dark web monitoring, for example. About 2 weeks before the attack, that exact user that was breached, their password was released on one of the dark web forums. So when it's released in a dark web forum that everyone has access to, at that point it's a free for all, right? Anybody can go out there, try to figure it out. The first places they're going to go, if it's a business email, they'll go to G Suite, and they'll go to Office 365 for email. Those will be the first two places that they'll try, and they'll just take a bunch of those accounts and just try to go through them. If they catch one, if they find one that logs in, then they will do whatever else they need to do. So those are just the important things that you really have to pay attention to and really think about when you're trying to protect your business. Because as you can see here, there's almost like the three pillars. So we have the protect pillar of security. So that's having a password manager, setting up the multi-factor authentication, and doing all that. Having the dark web monitoring, they'll fall into the detect principle of security. So you're able to know, okay, this password was compromised. Maybe that one site that this password was compromised from does not allow multi-factor authentication, or they're not there yet. So then at that point, you can properly respond and work with the user and make sure they change their password. So now let's move on to the one thing that we never want to see, right? So when a breach happens. So there's a couple of things that you can do. The first thing I always say is not every compromise becomes a breach, but many of them do. And when that happens, the results can be devastating. And we'll talk about those in just a second. But the other thing that I actually forgot to put on the slide here is it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when you'll be compromised. It's actually one thing that I somehow skipped. So what you really want to think about here is it doesn't mean that when you're compromised, it automatically becomes a breach, but you will be compromised at one point or another. It could be an email attack or business email compromise. You can get ransomware, you can get malware, you can get a keylogger. So it's really important to always keep that in the back of your mind when you're trying to work on those. But at a point where you get compromised and you are not able to catch it, you are not able to see it, and it does become a breach, then some of the results coming from it could be devastating, especially in a nonprofit world, if you think about that. So the number one thing is your reputation. So the reputational damage, it's probably the biggest, it's the biggest loss that could happen for any kind of business, if it's a nonprofit, if it's a regular small and medium business, if it's an enterprise. Losing trust of your customers that you cannot properly protect their data could really put you out of business. Or in a nonprofit world, especially if you're receiving donations or someone makes a large donation on a regular basis, or if you have ones that come back on a regular basis, once your reputation is damaged, sometimes it might be really hard to get those back, especially if you got ransomware and you were forced to pay the ransom to get your data back. Then the money's not going where it really is supposed to go to a cause. Sometimes it might be used for other things. So it's important to think about that. There are federal regulations and industry standards that could hit you with very hefty fines and penalties. So thinking about that. And then there's always the persistent compromise. So a lot of times, if you don't have proper detection and response in place, you may think, okay, we went through, we cleaned it up, we restored our data, or we paid the ransom. But the truth is the attackers never left. They're still sitting there. Maybe they encrypted it, they figured out, okay, you restored your backups, all that stuff. Though sometimes the tools or what they put on your system, if they're not thoroughly checked, could just sit there and then they can attack you again. And the odds of getting hit with ransomware after paying, especially, are getting higher and higher. It's almost 2 in 10 companies that have paid the ransom were hit with ransomware again in the future. So at this point, let's kind of switch over and talk about some other things, is how you can actually protect yourself. And I'll always start with that. I'll always start with every business, every organization, before they can figure out what the problems are, what they need to protect themselves from, should always start with a risk assessment. So the question that you want to ask yourself here is, when is the last time you actually had a risk assessment? When is the last time you had either an internally completed risk assessment or a third party come in and at least go through a cybersecurity risk assessment questionnaire or a business risk assessment questionnaire and just try to bring up some of the points that you may not always be thinking about to try to figure those risks out? And then what did your risk assessment include? What were the questions? What areas did you look at? Did you only look at the financial areas? Did you only look at the computer areas or cybersecurity? Did you look at the physical aspect of a risk assessment? Things like that. Because you really must identify all your risks before you can move on to protecting the assets from those risks. And some of the stuff that we normally do is, once we identify the risks, either by going through the various cybersecurity controls or questionnaires or however else anyone else does those risk assessments, we try to determine the likelihood of the risk and also what it will do if that happens. So then it's really important that you always review all of your assets and that you identify those risks. And then from there, we actually can go into managing security. So managing any kind of risks, you always want to do it through layers. So in this scenario, we actually do want to talk about how do the layers work between being on the network and off the network, especially in today's normal where everyone is working from home. You want to always have that comparison and see how you can do that. So having the proper email security, that will be one of them because they'll protect you on the network and off the network. Going into the endpoint protection and monitoring and response, that will be on both. Sometimes firewalls. Right now we have newer firewalls that could protect you in both, but normally you will have that firewall on your network and then protect the endpoints when employees take their laptops or computers home. Then we have the network layer security services, something that could protect on and off the network, because you do want to make sure that when your employees have laptops and they take them out of your office, that they're still protected in the same way. And then one that's oftentimes skipped and not talked about much is cybersecurity awareness training and also policies. There are a lot of businesses that we work with that until we come in and start working with them and helping them with that, they don't really have proper information security policies or information security manual where all employees and staff actually read and they know what's there to protect them, and they also know how to spot different things too. So with that, let's move on to what every business should have in terms of, I call it like the minimum security, the minimum security requirements. Um, as a nonprofit, you should always have an acceptable use policy. So your employees should know the data they come into your office, what can and can't do with data, with their computers, on the network, on the Wi-Fi, with the client information, things of that nature. The employee education and cybersecurity awareness training. That's probably one of the most critical things you can do, knowing that over 90% of compromises, breaches, and hacks begin with a human. Having a structured approach to maintenance. It can't be that we don't have time to do patching or we can't take a server down or nobody has done it in the past. It just has to happen. That's like one of those things that it needs to happen. It's like putting gas in your car. If you don't put gas in your car, it's not going anywhere. Having a centrally managed next generation antivirus or endpoint protection, especially now with BYOD and pretty much, I would say 90% of employees that have email on their phone have a personal phone. They do not have a company issued phone. So having those mobile device policies in place to make sure that their mobile devices at minimum have a passcode on their phone and that they're not compromised it's always a plus. And having the different security protocols on what happens if that's detected that it's not there. You always have to have backups that work. And I will say that the last time you should be testing your backups is in case of a disaster or a breach. Performing regular risk and vulnerability assessments. That's something we already talked about. It should be done at least annually from the risk assessment standpoint. And for anyone that has any applications that they may host at their office or cloud provider where their customers could log in or people can come in and do give donations, those should also have vulnerability scans to make sure that those sites are secure and are not compromised. Having the security monitoring and detection, because remember, when you have monitoring and detection, you can actually respond to security threats. And having a general incident response plan to adverse events. And with that, what is really important is actually having a list of, so in an incident response plan, what we always want to put in is what are we doing to prevent an incident? So that's like an incident preparation. Then from there, we also want to have a list of different organizations that we might need to contact, because if something was to happen, we don't want to be doing it at that point of time. We want to have it all written up. So if it's contacting the FBI, if it's ransomware, contacting your local police department, or you have to contact some of your customers or patients or clients, having that list and knowing that, it could really help. Um, it could really help in the madness of the situation. And then also having a plan. What happens? So let's say an incident is detected by an employee. Do they know who they have to notify if they see something? Do they know what the next person who they have to notify? What is the process? What's the procedure of going through and evaluating what happened? And then from there, we move on to eradicating any kind of threats. And then we go into the post review. So we can do a review of what happened, how did our process work, did our process not work, and then we evaluate and keep going. All right, perfect. And then if you do have any questions, please make sure to put them in the chat. I think, Joe, thank you for putting that in the chat as well. But if you do have any of them, please put them in there so we can answer them at the end. All right, so now let's move on. And maybe Joe, if you want to jump in, if not, I can take that. I can take that as well. Do you know, as a nonprofit, if your credentials are for sale on the dark web? So the one thing that we want to do here for you as a thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and spend 45 minutes with us. We want to give back, and we want to see, we talked about how important it is making sure that your credentials are not on the dark web. So having that in here, you can email Joe and you can receive your free dark web scan. So we can see if your credentials are exposed on the dark web, and we can also help you, tell you what you can do to protect yourself from there. I see Sean just asked the question. We probably move on to the questions now. So I'll take questions. I see Sean. Thank you for the questions. What keeps password managers from getting hacked? It's actually a really good question. There are good password managers and there are bad password managers. You know, there's always a thing. So you always want to do your research. Let's say if we look at 1Password. 1Password is a password manager. And in there's a few things. You have a master key for your account, which is a 32 or 40 digit key that whenever you go to set up your password manager, log into a password manager from a new device that is not logged in before, you have to put in that key. Then you have to put in your username and your password, and then your multi-factor authentication. So it could be a text message you receive or a Google Authenticator code or things of that nature. So that's really what is there. And then also it's important to do research on your password manager is by looking, what is the security of the password manager? Is the data that's at rest, is it encrypted? Can the employees of the company that wrote or built the password manager, do they actually have access to your data? And a lot of times what you want to look for is you want to make sure that the company is either SOC 2 reviewed. And what SOC 2 is, it's an independent review that is being done for all the policies and procedures of the business to make sure that they align with what they're telling you. And a lot of times that will be in there as well. There are some password managers that the way that they work is when you go to log in, when you put in your username, you actually are not allowed to put in your password until you do that second factor. So that actually takes out what's called a brute force attack, to where the attackers can go and try to keep putting in password for a user, and maybe at some point they'll get one, and then they can try to take it to the next step of trying to figure out what their multi-factor authentication is. But this one actually takes us out because you can't even put a password. And a lot of times that's a deterrent, because once they see that, then they're kind of just moving forward. We have any other questions? Nope. However, not seeing any. All right, so we have one more question come in, and what's the difference between a risk and a vulnerability assessment? So just to break that down for you, the risk assessment is, I would say, a business process. So it's not a technical process, it's a business process. Where a vulnerability assessment is more of a technical process or a technical control. In the risk assessment, we go through a questionnaire or a list of standards that we want to put in our business that could be all administrative, technical, and or physical. But it's basically just sitting down, reviewing them, making sure that we have those, do we not have those, and also identifying the risks for the business. What a vulnerability assessment is, and it could be both internal and external, it's the hacker's point of view. And a lot of times there we'll actually use automated tools that hackers will also use to try to figure out how vulnerable some piece of equipment might be. And that is a technical control, and a lot of times it's done by tools on a schedule basis, where a risk assessment is a business process, and it is something that has to be done by a human.
Hey, Bart, another question. How can phishing be prevented? I know we talked about training, which is very important.
Yeah, so training is number one. And then the email security protection, that's another one, because most modern email security platforms have ways to prevent phishing. So that's another thing, is having the email security layer for your email is that's always another thing to have. There are also now, because phishing has become so popular with all kinds of breaches and compromises, that there are companies out there now that's basically all they do, is they detect phishing. So even on top, they don't really care. They don't care about spam. They don't care about viruses in your email. So it's an additional tool that you can also add to your security layers that actually does connect to every user's mailbox, and it looks for those phishing attempts both internally and externally.
And Bart, correct me if I'm mistaken, my recollection with those is that really the most important line of defense is the really good training for the staff, because stuff's always going to get through. Would you say that that's true? More than like having a shield, it's if you know people don't know they need to be careful with stuff, like they're going to let the barbarians in the gate.
Yeah, that'll always be the number one thing. So, but what you really want to take is the approach to every problem and the approach to any kind of risk that you have. You always want to take a layered approach. So it's like peeling an onion, right? So the first peel is the employee training, is making sure that they're trained. Your second peel of the onion will be the email security platform. They'll grab 80% or 90% because they do it all. They'll do spam, they'll do antivirus, they'll do malware, and look at all the information that comes through in your email. And then the third one could be another layer that is more lateral, that connects to everyone's mailbox and looks for any kind of signs of phishing. So you always want to think about peeling the onion. Especially that's why I always say, when it comes to security, if you want to protect from an attacker, put your business in the center of the onion and put the attacker on the outside, and then try to figure out what those layers are.
Yeah. When you do the staff training, do you ever use the kind of the spear phishing tests to, the ones that aren't real spear phishing, but they'll get people who are kind of sloppy to click, and so you can identify those folks and give them extra training?
Yes. So what we do is, what we call that, we'll send those out at minimum. We try to send those out at minimum monthly when we work with our clients. And what I actually like to call it is that everyone that clicks, they get rewarded with more training. So they don't get penalized, they get a reward of more training.
Yeah, so they'll get a instantaneous training if they click something wrong in one of those emails, Sean. immediately they'll be taken to a response that said, hey, you clicked on this, here's why it's wrong, watch this quick minute-long video on why, so it's a constant education for end users, just to keep it front of mind, because we could put a lot of layers in, but like you said, something's going to get through. Even somebody calling in, over the phone, I could call into a company and get passwords very easily, right? It's just, talking to somebody the right way. And so you have to make employees aware of that as well. Not just through an email, but, somebody calls them in on the phone and is trying to talk them into, giving them information. So education is key.
That's so true. And that's such an old school approach, Joe, but I think you're right. And in my experience with nonprofits, we have, and this is I do a two-edged sword, and it's part of what makes the nonprofit sector lovely to work in. But there's just an extra level of trust and warm fuzzies, and we don't want to do away with that, right? Because then that kind of kills some other good things. But it's important to, in my experience, to strike a balance there, right, where we can keep those warm fuzzies, where, like you guys say, it's an opportunity to retrain the staff rather than like shake a finger at them. But we do need to help people, especially those who might not by nature kind of have those defenses, like help them dial in the appropriate level of trust, especially when dealing with strangers or emails they weren't expecting or things like that.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. I've seen where the spam filter actually caught a phishing email. So it was in the quarantine, and the employee who was new saw that it was coming from her boss, released it from the quarantine, and then took action and spent hundreds of dollars of her own money buying gift cards, which was kind of the ransom, thinking she was doing something good for her boss. Everything was wrong about that email. It had the boss's name on it, but it was not his corporate email. It was kind of obvious, but she was wanting to impress. And so by constantly reminding people of what to look for and making it mandatory, if you're going to work here, you've got to do this training, because it only takes one person to let something through. Years ago, I was working at a company, and a laptop got stolen. It was during lunchtime. Somebody walked in the front door, walked all the way down the hall, probably about 60, 70 feet, 100 feet, into an office, picked up the laptop off the desk and walked out. And there was people in their office. They passed people. But this person walked in with so much confidence, they just thought maybe it was a vendor or somebody that belonged there, right? So it's really easy to get past those personal defenses as well, whether it's on the phone or just walk in, if you walk into a building looking all scared and shaking and everything, okay, you stand out. But if you walk in with confidence, like you belong there, you can do a lot of damage, right? So it's the same thing with technology.
That's an excellent point. And you guys haven't said this directly, but I'll go ahead and say, like, what I've heard through this, or one of my takeaways is really you guys have made a really strong case for having good managed IT for small, medium-sized nonprofits, because it's just, now so many nonprofits, small and medium-sized nonprofits, we think we can do a DIY job on these things, but even if we have the time, which we rarely do, just the level of expertise to kind of put in place all the stuff that you're talking about and know that you're doing it well. This is the kind of thing that I've yet to find an employee at a small or medium-sized nonprofit who has the level of expertise to do this kind of work. And they can definitely do some of the due diligence, definitely implement pieces of it, but to feel like they by themselves can do it comprehensively, like that's a full-time job in a lot of ways.
It is. And we spend a lot of our time keeping up with that, right? What's the latest trends? What are the bad guys doing? And the solutions change as well, right? 1 year this antivirus might be the best on the market, and next year there's another one, right? So we're constantly reviewing our our security solutions and making changes to make sure that, you know, clients are protected, right? So, so you really have to be involved and spend time in it. And yeah, it's a challenge, you know, especially during COVID. The bad guys have stepped up their game, because people are working from home. They're not behind the corporate firewall, et cetera. So it takes extra layers and especially the training to keep them aware. So.
Yes, exactly. And as I said a few times during the presentation as well, is the bad guys are doing the same thing. They're trying to figure out better and easier ways to do what they're trying to do. So we spend a lot of times trying to stay a step ahead of them.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have two options. Turn your computer off, put it in the box. Absolutely a safe computer, no doubt. Or
Or never go on the internet.
or you make a plan and start moving in the security direction. You know, start with the low hanging fruit, the easy things, you know, the training and things like that. And depending on your compliance level and needs, that gets a lot more complicated, right? But definitely start, you know, having one layer, two layers is better than no layers, right? Eventually you want to have 3, 4, 5 layers of security, you know, to protect yourself, but you've got to start somewhere. And so well, this has been great, guys. Thanks for all of that. You know, it's overwhelming, and but it's necessary. So
yes, definitely is.
Sean, appreciate you taking the time, being on with us and your input.
A pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. And if you have any questions, please send me an email. It was on the screen, and it's jdunn@stradiant.com. Or if you just go to the website, fill out a contact us form. And we're more than happy to provide you with a free dark web scan. So please take advantage of that, and let's you know, start working on a plan. Well, great, everybody. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Afternoon.
Thank you.
Take care.